Welcome back everyone. Today we're gonna be making a bucket hat. And this hat comes in multiple sizes ranging from extra small to extra large. So you should find a size that works for you. We're also gonna be adding an optional feature on the back to make it adjustable. With all that being said, don't forget to grab the printable pattern and let's get started. Getting started with supplies, you need the half yard for your main fabric, and I recommend using a canvas, denim, or twill. These are all very durable fabrics and they're easy to work with. I'm actually going to be using a lighter weight denim for the entire project. I liked how it looked and it turned out very well. But like always, get creative with it, test different fabrics, and see what works best for you. You'll need one sweatband, and I'm using a sweatband that's off of capsupplyco.com. You can make these, but I do recommend buying them. It just turns out a lot better and your final product is more professional looking. You'll need 4 to 6 eyelets. These are going to be used for the vents on the side and also the adjuster in the back. If you're not going to be making the adjuster, you can just get away with 4 eyelets. If you do plan on making the adjuster, you'll need 10 to 12 inches of elastic cord and 1 cord stopper. Again, this is optional, so if you don't want to add the adjuster, you don't need these supplies. Lastly, you'll need your pattern. This pattern is available at properfitclothing.com. It's super easy to use. All you have to do is download it, print it, and you're ready to go. And real quick, before you start printing, there is a print to size chart, so you don't have to print out the entire pattern. You're gonna wanna take a look at the size chart, see what size works best for you, and then flip over to the 3rd page, and it will show you exactly what pages to print. It's a great way to save on a ton of paper. And once you have all your supplies gathered and your pattern printed out, it's time to move into cutting. Real quick, before you start cutting out the fabric, I wanna show you how you can modify this pattern to your exact measurements. Although this pattern does come in multiple sizes, there are ways to quickly change the height of the crown, brim size, and band size. To change the height, all you have to do is cut off the seam allowance at the top of the panel. Make sure you're being very precise, and we're going to use that as a template to make our next cuts. For example, if you're trying to shorten it, we're going to line it back up with the top edge, trace it, and then cut it again. And you can keep repeating this step until you get to the height you want. The main goal is to keep that curved edge exactly the same. Keep in mind, small amounts drastically change the size of the crown. The same goes if you're trying to make it taller. You're just going to cut off that top edge, extend it, place paper in between both sides, tape it down, and you have a taller crown. The same rule applies to the brim. If you want to shorten it up, we're going to use the bottom edge seam allowance, cut along that seam allowance, and move it up or down based on how much you want to change the size. It's just something fun to play around with to get a custom hat that works perfect with your head shape. The last one you can modify is the band. If you want to make it taller or shorter, you just add or subtract to the height. There is no curve to this panel, so you don't have to cut off the seam allowance, making it super easy to change up the size. This panel is also optional. If you don't want to add the band, you don't need to add it. When it comes to the top panel, you don't really need to make adjustments. If you do make adjustments, you're going to also want to adjust the top edge of the side panel. This is because that top edge curve matches exactly to the circumference of the top panel. But anyways, have some fun with it, and moving on, after cutting, you're going to want to end up with 1 top panel cut out of your main fabric, 2 side panels cut out of your main fabric on the fold of your fabric, 4 brim panels cut out of your main fabric on the fold of your fabric, and lastly 2 side band panels cut out of your main fabric. And before you cut this panel, make sure you have the pattern overlapping and taped down to get the correct size. Moving on to assembly, we're going to start by grabbing the brim panels, lay them out with right sides facing up. You should have 4 panels. With all the panels laid out, we're going to place the right sides together, lining up the sides and curved edges. Place a few pins on the sides, and then we're going to stitch each of those sides at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And it's very important that you get this stitch at exactly a 1/4 inch seam allowance for each side, because if it's off just a little bit, that inside circumference is not going to match up with the bottom edge of the side panel, and you're going to get either a bigger brim or a smaller brim. But from here, we're going to open up the panel, move that seam allowance to the left or the right, and add a top stitch to each one of those sides. To get these stitches looking nice, I do recommend using an edge presser foot. And I do recommend taking the time to do this step, because once you place these panels together and you start adding your brim stitches, it makes it a lot easier. Next, we're going to open up the panels, place the right sides together, lining up both of those side seams. It is helpful to mark the centers on the top and bottom just so you have a reference point as you're sewing. Keep in mind this is a curved edge, so it may want to stretch as you're feeding it through your sewing machine. A good way to stop this fabric from stretching is just adding pins all the way around that outside edge. This will help keep everything lined up and prevent those layers from becoming offset. After adding the pins, we're going to stitch around the outside edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And take your time, you want to make this stitch as neat as possible. It is best to do this stitch in one go without starting and stopping, because this is going to help keep that curve on the outside perfect, giving you a more professionally shaped brim at the end. When you're satisfied with the stitch, we're going to flip the right sides out, take the time to push that entire edge out and press it down. You mainly want to make sure the top and bottom layer line up perfectly around that outside edge. As you can see, I didn't use an interfacing to make this brim. I found that this fabric was thick enough that when these two layers got pushed together and the stitches were added, it made it thick enough, so there was no need to add the interfacing, and this is totally dependent on the style of fabric you are using. If you do want to add the interfacing because you're using a lighter weight fabric, I recommend using a mid-weight interfacing. This will give you just enough added depth to make it feel more like a brim in the end. When it comes to applying the interfacing, you want to add it before you sew the panels together, and you only need to add it to 2 of the panels. Because it is a delicate balance from adding too much to too little, making it too thick or too thin. It's something you're going to have to play around with to find the best strategy for your fabric. You may want to add the brim stitches first if you're uncertain, because they do add another layer of thickness to your fabric after you stitch them all on. Just like in the previous step, we don't want the fabric to move and bunch up as we're adding the brim stitches, so what we're going to do is place pins around the outside edge to hold that fabric in place while we're stitching. Once you have all your pins in place and you're ready to start stitching, we're going to start on the outside edge and add a stitch 1/4 inch, moving all the way towards the inside edge. And I really find the more stitches you add, the thicker that fabric feels. When it comes to the spacing, they don't have to be 1/4 inch apart. You can realistically make these spread apart as far as you want. The main goal for me is to try to cover the entire surface area and leave about 1/2 inch at the top so you have enough room to attach it to your crown. And like I said before, the outcome is really based upon the style of fabric you're using. If you're using a thinner fabric, it's going to be more floppy. If you're using a thicker fabric, it's going to be more stiff. That's why the interfacing is a great option to have around, but you don't always need to add it. But other than that, your brim panel is complete, so for the moment we can place it off to the side and grab both of the side panels. Separate the panels with right sides facing up. Using the pattern, place it on top of the panel and locate the eyelet placement guide. Mark the guide with chalk, reflect it over the center, mark the opposite side, and do the same thing for the second panel. Snip or punch a hole in each one of the chalked areas. I'm going to be using a standard eyelet with the backing. These are going to become the vents on the side of the hat. You can either use eyelets, or if you have the equipment, you can make them by stitching. Place the front part of the eyelet through the opening on the right side of the fabric, flip over to the wrong side, and add your backing. To install them, I'll be using a standard hammer die. So you place the base on the right side, the die on the back side, and you hammer it down. If you're looking to speed up production, you can get a machine that does this in one step. Go ahead and repeat this process for the rest of the eyelets. And what we're doing is trying to get these eyelets to line up so that way when we bring these two side panels together, they're right across from one another. At this step, there's a few different directions you can take. I typically wait till the end to add my branding, but if you plan on adding an embroidered logo, this is the time to do it because it's a lot easier to add this logo working with a flat piece of fabric than a finished hat at the end. You just want to make sure you add your logo above the side band placement guide and below the seam allowance at the top edge. And this is optional. If you don't plan on adding a logo, you don't need to worry about this step. But for the moment, we can place the side panels off to the side and grab both of the side band panels. Separate the panels with right sides facing up, locate the hem guide at the top of the panel, and we're going to be adding that hem to both of the panels. The best way to get this precise is to fold the edge over on the pattern and then chalk it out on your panels. This doesn't have to be 100% accurate, you just mainly want to make sure that both of your panels are symmetrical. After making the mark, roll the edge over and press it down. Repeat this step for both of the panels. If you're using a fabric that doesn't press very well, like an upholstery, you're going to want to pin this edge over. If done correctly, when you line them up on the sides, both heights will be the exact same. Feel free to make any adjustments if needed. Slide the panels to the side, grab the side panels, and we're going to place them on the bottom edge. Using the pattern, locate the side band placement guide. Quickly mark the center and side on both panels. This is going to be used as a reference so we have them even going across the bottom edge. Your panel should fall below the chalk point and line up perfectly with the bottom edge. Pin both sides down and add a top stitch along the top edge of the side band panel. As you're sewing, this panel may want to stretch a little bit, so when you get done, if it's hanging off the edge, you can just trim it flush with the side edge. This may not happen. I'm just using a very stretchy denim, so when that presser foot hits it, it offsets the layers. It's always a good idea just to double check, make sure both those bands are the exact same height. If everything is looking good, we can place the right sides together, lining up the top and bottom edge, and from here, we're going to stitch both sides at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Just like sewing the brim panels, you really want to be precise and make these exactly a 1/4 inch seam allowance. If it's off just a little bit, that bottom circumference is not going to line up with the circumference of that inside curved edge of the brim. But anyways, flip the right sides out and we're going to add a top stitch to the side seams. There's a few different ways you can do this. If you are just going to do a straight stitch, you're going to want to serge that inside seam so it's not a raw edge. But if you're trying to make it look more professional, you're going to want to use a double fold bias tape binder. Typically, these are designed to be installed on a double needle sewing machine, but I'm going to show you a way you can do this on a regular domestic sewing machine. If you plan on going this route, we're going to apply this stitch to both side seams. Start by replacing your needle with the twin needle. I'll have this needle linked in the description, and this needle works on all domestic machines. Switch your machine to zigzag stitch, your choice of length, and a 0 width. Thread your machine the same way, but add 2 spools of thread. Be sure to thread through both of the needles and add your binder. It's best to have the bias tape already in so you can line it up with the needles. And I found the easiest way to do this is just tape it down. And once you have it installed, give it a quick run to make sure all the stitches are looking good. Grab your front panels and place that seam directly in the center of the binder and stitch all the way through. And just like that, it's going to add a double top stitch on the front and cover the back seam. If you want to speed up the process, I recommend looking into a dedicated double needle sewing machine. And that's what I'm using in the video. I'm running the seam in the center of the guide and it's adding a stitch to both sides and the bias tape on the back. Again, this is not mandatory, it's just the way that most professional hats are made. You can still just add a regular top stitch on both sides with a single needle sewing machine. This is just a good way to cover up that raw edge on the inside. It's just something to think about and a way to upgrade your machines as you start making more hats. From here, we're going to add the top, so grab the top panel. And the first thing you want to do is locate the center and side guides and chalk those out on your panel. This is not a perfect circle, so you want to make sure these are accurate or else that top panel is going to kind of sit uneven once you sew it on. Once you're ready, we're going to flip the side panel assembly inside out. Grab the top panel, line up the sides of the top panel with the side seams of the side panel assembly. Place a few pins and do the same thing for the center markings. Just like in previous steps, this is a curved edge, so it may want to stretch as you sew it, so just be careful. And from here, we're going to stitch all the way around that outside edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. If done correctly, the circumference of the top panel should line up perfectly with the top edge of the side panel assembly. And no worries, if something got offset as you're sewing, you can always de-thread it and try it again. Before adding our next top stitch, we want to trim the bias tape flush with the seam allowance. Same goes for anything else sticking past that seam allowance. Once you have the outside edge all cleaned up, we're going to add bias tape all the way around the outside edge. Again, I'm using the same technique with the bias tape binder. This one can be a little bit tricky since it's a curved edge, so it may take some practice. What I like to do is leave a little extra bias tape on the bottom so I can roll that edge over and tack stitch it down. You don't need a lot, you just need enough so that way that edge is perfectly clean on the inside. Since I'm stitching from the inside, you do want to make sure your bobbin matches the color on the outside, or else you're going to see that tack stitch when you wear the hat. As you can see, it's just a little tack stitch, but since I matched the thread color, it's barely noticeable. If it fell outside of one of those flowers, it would almost be invisible. The next step is optional. We're going to be adding the adjuster, so mark the center of the back band. And what we're going to be doing is placing eyelets on either side of that center. I'm using the same eyelets I used in the previous step. Separate the band panel from the side panel because we're only going to be punching holes in the band panel. When it comes to the spacing, you can space them a 1/4 inch away from the center marking. And the reason I'm doing it at this stage is because that when you sew all these panels together, if you added them in previous steps, it may not fall directly in the center. And for this adjuster to work good, you need it to fall exactly in the center. And from here, just install your eyelets like we did in the last steps. Remember, we're only installing them in the band layer and not going through the side panel. The next step is cutting a strip of elastic cord to the size that is just smaller than the band panel. And don't worry, you can cut it longer and always trim it down after you sew it on. Feed one end of the cord through the eyelet and then the opposite end through both holes of a double opening cord stopper. Slide the cord stopper so it's in the center of the elastic cord and then feed that same end back through the opposite eyelet. As you can see, my elastic is pretty long, so I'm going to trim it down before I sew it. And you'll want to tack stitch the outside edge down as close as you can to the top of the band panel. That's really all it takes to make a universal adjuster on the back. It is a great way to go if you plan on manufacturing these so you can make limited sizes but still make them adjustable adjustable so everyone can wear them. Since we only tack stitch the outside edges of the cord, it may want to flop down as you're attaching the brim. Just keep that in mind and move it out of the way as you're stitching through that area. Next, we're going to lay it face down with the bottom edge upright and grab the brim assembly. Before adding the brim assembly, you want to figure out what's the top and what's the bottom. I'm using the same fabric for both sides, so it could be either or. If you're using two different colors, then you're going to want to place the top color to the right side of the crown. Just like when we added the top panel, we're going to be using the side seams of the crown and the side seams of the brim assembly to make it perfectly aligned. And I find it's best to add the pins on the sides, the centers, and then fill in the gaps. With all the pins in place, we're going to stitch both the assemblies together at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Take your time and try to make it as neat as possible. After stitching, flip the right sides out, double check, make sure all those layers got stitched together. If done correctly, the brim should be even all the way around that edge. At this point, you can try it on, but it's not going to fit correctly until we install the sweatband. And that's what we're going to be doing in the next step. So we're going to flip it so we can see the inside and push the brim panel down. When it comes to the sweatband, I bought mine off of capsupplyco.com. It's a millinery grade sweatband. It works for all types of hats, and it's a great way to go for a professional finish. Before stitching it down, we want to wrap it around the outside edge, and keep in mind we're sewing this just to the seam allowance so you have a little bit of fabric to work with. Bring it around and figure out where both ends line up, mark them with chalk, and that's where we're going to stitch the sweatband together. To get a clean finish, we're going to roll one of the ends over and line it up with the chalk point. Before stitching, place a pin, wrap it around the hat one more time. If it lines up perfectly, add a tack stitch to the sweatband. At this point, if you are adding a label or branding to that sweatband, you'll want to add it at this stage before we sew it to the hat. Moving right along, grab the hat assembly, and we're going to line that stitch up with the back center of the hat assembly. Keep in mind we are sewing this only to the seam allowance. So line the sweatband up all the way around the outside edge. And before stitching it down, you may want to pull the base off your sewing machine to turn it into a cylinder bed. This will give you the freedom to spin that hat around the machine and overall making it more accurate. After finishing up, double check both the inside and outside, make sure it's sewn just to the seam allowance. Push the sweatband to the inside of the hat, double check the right side. If everything is looking good, all the layers are stitched together and the sweatband is lined up, we can move back to the inside. And a step that I didn't do but you can do is actually serging around the bottom edge of the crown. This will clean up any of that fraying on the inside behind the sweatband. This step isn't mandatory because you're already stitching over that edge, so it's going to stop fraying, but if you really want to make it professional, it's something you can think about. From here, we're going to add our final stitch, and it's going to be along the bottom edge of the sideband panel. So you want to move that sweatband, flatten it out on the inside. Pull the brim down as far as possible and stitch all the way around the bottom edge as close as you can to that edge. For the best results, I recommend using an edge presser foot and matching your thread color to your fabric color. After finishing up the top stitch, you can really see that band looks more like a band with the defined edges. It not only added to the looks, but it also helped push that sweatband to keep it flat on the inside. Because without this stitch, the sweatband kind of pops out, so you really lock it in by adding this top stitch. And moving on to the final step, that's adding your branding if you didn't already add it in previous steps. I added a few more with leather and double-sided rivets. I feel like adding all the small details like this brings out a unique style. Like I said in the beginning, after finishing up and trying it on, you can start to adjust the brim size, the crown size, the band size, and overall making it custom to your style. And as far as the brim goes, it doesn't have to be just a curved edge. You can actually make that choppy or a different look. The band is another fun one to play around with. You can make that taller, shorter, or even use different materials. Same goes for the side panels. You can really adjust these to fit your exact measurements. So have some fun with it, get creative, and make the bucket hat unique to your style. And there you have it, your bucket hat is complete. Hopefully yours turned out good. This can be a little bit tricky if it's your first time making a hat, but I recommend sticking to it, trying it a few times, testing out different fabrics, and they'll eventually start turning out awesome. But like always, I want to see what you come up with, so tag me on Instagram at Properfit Clothing, and until then, I'm gonna keep the videos coming at you, so I'll see you next time.